important is it to you to be an expert at what you do? And what is your definition of what it means to be an expert? Often our unrealistic expectations of how much we really need to know get in the way of our ability to confidently perform our roles. In this episode, I speak with Kit Pang, a public speaking coach and founder of BostonSpeaks, about his lack of imposter syndrome and how his definition of being an expert helps him to confidently support people who work in fields he's never directly experienced himself. My hope is that this discussion will help you to reframe what it means to be an expert so that you can more confidently maximize your impact and achieve your goals. Thank you. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help women and others overcome imposter syndrome and advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest to share how they've navigated self-doubt to achieve success. The more we share our stories, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us. Thank you so much for listening and sharing. All right, welcome, Kit. I'm really excited. You and I started this conversation in a different forum, and I'm excited to bring the second half of this conversation here today. Before we do, I'd love to invite you to introduce yourself.
Yes, and Kim, I'm super excited for this. Just a quick intro. Again, my name is Kit Pang. I'm the founder of BostonSpeaks. The main thing that I do is I help people with their public speaking anxiety. But other than that, I'm a human being just like the rest of us. But let's jump into this. Kim, I'm excited.
That's perfect. And just to give everyone a little bit of background, so Kit, you kind of interviewed me for the summit that you put together on speaking, and we were having a conversation about imposter syndrome and really self-doubt as it relates to speaking. And the reason why I was excited to bring you onto this podcast is because you had talked a little bit about how imposter syndrome doesn't show up for you very often, that it's not entirely unfamiliar to you, but that it's not something that you feel has been disruptive to your life. And so I really wanted to continue that conversation to see how you were able to escape the misery that so many of us experience, but more importantly, to see what we can learn from you, because I have a feeling that you bring perspectives that will be helpful for others to hear. So can you tell me a little bit about what comes to mind for you when you think about imposter syndrome in your own experience?
Yeah, so when it comes to, actually, let me first say this. It's not that I have not experienced imposter syndrome, but I'll relate it to, sometimes if I leave the house, is the house locked? I would think about it for a second, and then it wouldn't bug me anymore. That's how I would see imposter syndrome. I might have a thought once in a while, but it doesn't bug me. I keep on moving towards the rest of my day. But how it shows up, or in the past, as a public speaking coach, one is most of the clients that I work with are people in organizations. Okay, so therefore they work in an organization, or maybe they're business owners. I've never had a job in an organization, but that's the people that I usually help. And so that's that came up sometimes because I used to be a hip hop dancer. So all my life, I just had a dancing job working in a studio. So how can someone that worked at a studio understand the organization side of it? And also, I never had public speaking anxiety like my clients do. So how do I help someone when I haven't experienced their level of public speaking anxiety? And then kind of like the last one is, can I really help people with public speaking anxiety? So those are the three that I would say they show up, but they don't bug me. It doesn't take over my life. Yes.
Whereas if I don't think I locked the door, will turn around halfway through my drive, come all the way back, double check. So I like that analogy. But I want to, first of all, tell me more about how you went from being a hip hop dancer to wanting to help people in organizations speak more confidently. What was the mission for you?
Yeah. Growing up, I was not the most confident, or public speaking wasn't, the thing for me. But when I entered a public speaking competition in college, I did it for the money. It was the last year. And that time when I went on stage, I felt it. Like I felt in the zone. I had that feeling of letting go in the public. So therefore, I was able to be in the zone. And because of that experience, that drove me to say, I want to speak more. And at the same time, I want to help people achieve that feeling.
And as we all know, public speaking is one of the scariest things that people can imagine doing. It's something that, many people are terrified of. So what do you generally see when you're working with people? What are they afraid of? What do they tell you is their anxiety around it?
Well, most people actually don't know what they're scared of. I mean, they're just mostly scared of being scared. You know how sometimes we get nervous and then we get more nervous about being nervous? Most people are at that level. They don't even know what's scaring them in the first place. Okay. And therefore, most people are telling people, oh, you speak too fast, or you say too many ums. And they're actually just working on the symptoms, but they're not working on really what's causing their fear in the first place. So most people, really, when it comes down to public speaking fear, is we tend to feel like people are going to judge us negatively, and because of the consequences that might occur because of how people might judge us.
And if someone feels that way, what's the number one thing you go to in your mind, or what's the thing that you think when you hear that, you think this is what they need?
I would say, as in what they need, what I've learned is we can never tell people what they need. They have to be open to accepting what they need. So they need to figure out the answers for themselves. Even though like I might have the secret to every single client, which is usually the same thing. And if I tell them, first, they might not believe in it. They might not try. They haven't had their own experience or had their own thoughts to figure it out first. So I would say, how can they gain awareness of what's causing their speaking anxiety in the first place? Same thing with, I would say, maybe imposter syndrome. Do you know what's causing it?
Okay.
Right? Most people, again, they haven't even searched out what's causing it. We're just afraid of being afraid. Is that, oh, this imposter syndrome, we have it again, so therefore we don't want to have it. Yeah.
Exactly. That's something I say a lot too, just like you said, when it comes to imposter syndrome, is you don't really manage imposter syndrome per se. You manage the triggers of imposter syndrome, right? So if you have this generalized fear that you're a fraud or that you're going to be found out, there's not a whole lot you can work with there. You need to really name what's at the root of that so that you can either reframe it in a more productive way, or you can manage it. So for a lot of people, it's, I'm afraid that I'm not as prepared as I should be, or I'm afraid I don't know as much as I need to, things like that. So once you can name it, then you can start to really dissect it more analytically and think about, is there an action plan here? Do I need to just reframe my thoughts around it? But it doesn't help to stay in this space of imposter syndrome or fear, because you can't really wrap your arms around it.
Yeah. Well, what's your go-to when people tell you I have imposter syndrome?
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's okay. Let's break it down, right? Like what's your version of imposter syndrome? Because everyone's is a little bit different. When you have imposter syndrome, how does it show up for you, and what is likely going on in that moment? Because it's not something, and similar to you, right? People generally speaking aren't public speaking on a regular basis unless that's their job. And so it's not like we're constantly in that state of fear. It's something that's episodic, right? It shows up when the moment shows up. And so how do we plan for it? I sort of think of it as a before, during, and after. How do you know what's likely to come up? What do you do when you're in the moment? And then what can you do afterwards if things didn't go the way you wanted them to?
Yeah. And I think the big thing is we are capable of changing. Like we have the capability in our minds to change. And I relate this because I know this is only on audio, but in the background, I have cats here. And what I really find interesting is that if you have pets, so maybe we don't have kids, if you have pets, like we have 3 cats, and every single cat is completely different. One eats like a slob, one eats very clean. But when my wife and I say, can the cats change their behavior? Right? Can they change their behavior? I think at first, I haven't dug into that side, but as human beings, we're able to change. If we notice we're eating like a slob, if we really wanted to, we can change it.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think that's an important point too, when it comes to the idea of public speaking, because when we are afraid of something, we make our world smaller, right? Because we will go out of our way to avoid the thing that we're afraid of unless we are motivated to address it. And so, not every job requires public speaking, but certainly the higher up you go, or the more externally facing you are, the more opportunities you're going to be presented with. And if that's truly terrifying to you, you likely won't take advantage of opportunities that are presented to you. So if you are making your world smaller and smaller, you're perpetuating that fear too, because you're not actually addressing it. So do you have tips for people who are, really afraid of doing it, but maybe aren't ready for a big stage or, something that's really intimidating? Are there ways to get your feet wet without getting?
Well, let me say this first, Kim. 90% of the people that I work with are not like the big events that you're talking about. They're probably with the same category with your clients in meetings, in high stakes meetings. Once in a while, maybe they have a talk or conference, but I would say 2 things. One is, I know many of my clients, they want to deal with the now. So we have to satisfy that. Like if we have the anxiety now, if our mind blanks out, what can we do now? Okay, forget the root cause and all that. We don't have time for that. I just want to know now. Okay, so we have to satisfy that. And then when we are thinking clearly, then we can investigate and clean the house and clean the mind later on. So I would say those 2 things, knowing what to do now and knowing what to do when you think clear. So, just a quick tip. When we have it now, if you're listening to this and you have that speaking anxiety, well, I have the nerves. What can I do now? You need to think about it like preparing for an earthquake or fire. I was taught when there was an earthquake, somehow go between the doors. Okay. Most people, the thing is, they just don't know what to do when something bad happens. Let's say the mind goes blank. They actually just don't know what to do. That's it. Like if an earthquake happens, I will go maybe through the door, I'll run. Same thing. Most people just don't know what to do when their mind goes blank. You just have to figure out one thing to do and try that a few times and practice that when you're not in panic mode. Same thing. You don't practice preparing, running out the house, or when there's an earthquake. You prepare when you're more calm. So same exact thing. So figure out one thing to do before your mind goes blank. Yeah,
that's a great tip. I think about that a lot too. Because I'm somebody who struggled with anxiety for much of my life. I know that experience really well, and so what I often tell people is, prepare for what you're most afraid of, right? What is it that you're afraid is going to happen? And then if you have a plan for that, then everything else sort of falls into place, right? So for a lot of the people that I work with, I'm afraid I'm going to be asked a question I don't know the answer to. Okay, so then that's going to happen someday. It's going to happen someday in your life that you're going to be asked a question you don't know the answer to. You cannot possibly predict every question you'll ever be asked. So if you have a plan for what your response will be when that happens, then things don't feel as terrifying or as intimidating once you actually get into that space.
Yes. But that's still working on the symptoms, because, eventually that's still solving the symptom side of it, not going to the root. But yes, we've been talking a lot about the anxiety. I know you might want to move into like the imposter syndrome side of things.
But they're all related as far as I'm concerned. And people might argue with me. Imposter syndrome is just an expression of anxiety. It's really, it's like, I'm afraid of that people are going to think I'm a fraud. It's anxiety. But I will shift gears a little bit to talk about the mindset piece, because I think that is important. You said some things when we were originally talking that I thought were interesting. And I think it related to how you think about how much you actually need to know in order to support your clients, right? Because I think we have this expectation that I need to be a quote unquote expert in order to speak about something. So can you say more about your perspective on that?
Yeah, when it comes to being an expert, I often ask people, what's the point of being an expert in the first place? And what would you say, actually, Kim? What's the point of being an expert in the first place?
Well, from my perspective, it's about being able to contribute to your field, right? The more you understand it, the more of an impact you can make. But the term expert is so subjective.
Yeah. And I think that's why we get too wound up in the detail. I'm not an expert. But again, people want to be an expert from this perspective is to help people get results faster. Mm-hmm. So therefore, the question I think we need to ask ourselves are, even without the credentials or the levels of amount of years, are we still able to get people's results or help people at the end of the day? Because being an expert is therefore maybe we know more, maybe we have more years of experience to help our team, our clients, our people grow faster. So if you think you can help people get results, and if you can say, yes, I do, then why does being an expert matter to you if you can still help people get results? And even better, maybe.
Yeah. And I guess I'm curious, and this is purely semantics, but if you can help people get results, doesn't that make you an expert? Right? I think we define expert in interesting ways, because for many of us, it's attached to credentials. It's attached to how many years of schooling or how many years of experience have we had, as opposed to really thinking about the results. So either we need to redefine what it means to be an expert, or we just need to throw out that term entirely as it relates to how we think about our value.
Yeah, because I think in our society, like this, it's like people think, oh, you got to have these names. But just to share an example, I'm bringing back the cats. Our cats, when we first adopted, so we have two sisters and another cat. The introduction went really bad, and they can't be in the same room together. Like we should be on one of those shows, those cat shows. We always, they can't be in the same room now today. And so I went to the library and I researched online. I got all the books on how to get cats to behave in one room. 10 books in the library, watched all the documentaries. I couldn't figure it out. Like I didn't know. So one day I got the book in front of me, and Lily's meowing now. There's this book. And it was called The Cat Whisperer. Okay. I said, I need some help. I might need to go. I need to go call a cat whisperer. It took me a year to finally call this person. She is from Texas. I wanted the best of the best. She's from Texas. But here's the thing. She's not certified. Okay. She doesn't have she didn't go to school for it. But I still thought she was the best. Why is that? Because she was able to help cat issues. Like she was able to demonstrate on video testimonials and all of that. I didn't even care if she went to school or not. I just cared if she can help me with my problem. Okay, at the end of the day. But when it comes back to us, we might be thinking, oh, I don't have these credentials, therefore I can't help people. People just care about you helping them at the end of the day.
Yeah, right. And that actually speaks to, a related point that I often share about managing imposter syndrome is when you are focusing on being of service, when you're simply thinking about how can I be of greatest help to this other person or to this team, to this project, whatever it is, then I'm less likely to be in my own head thinking about what I don't know or how I don't measure up, because I'm focused on the outcome. I'm focused on the external experience. And so I think that ties in there too. If if you choose what to focus on, you're choosing how you can be of service, or you can choose how you compare to other people. That's going to drive how you see yourself.
Yeah. And that's interesting, Kim, because I hear that a lot. People say that, but I'm going to play devil's advocate. Let's say they hear you and they say, be of service, instead of thinking of ourselves more. But how do we make that switch? Even though we know that, like, yes, I want to create value for my audience. Like, how do we be less of myself? Yes, I don't want to make it about myself, but I still do. Like, but how can we make that switch?
Well, it's a really good question. I think it requires a certain level of consciousness, because from my perspective, the automatic response is the ego-driven response. It's the one that protects our fragile ego from rejection or failure or whatever it is that we're afraid of, right? So that's going to be the reflexive response if we don't intervene at a more conscious level. And so I actually encourage people, when they find themselves in a moment of doubt or in a moment of discomfort or anxiety, to ask themselves very specifically, what's the response here that is coming from a place of service? And so I'll give you an example. If I'm sitting in a meeting room and I have a question, and I'm thinking to myself, I can't ask this question because I'm going to sound like an idiot and everyone's going to realize I don't know what I'm doing. That's an ego-driven way of thinking about it, because I want to protect myself from making a fool of myself. But if I ask myself, what would showing up from a place of service look like? Would it be holding back on asking that question because maybe it's not the right time, maybe it's not the right forum? Or would it be to ask the question because it's likely that I'm not the only one who has this question. And so if I put this out there, it might actually help other people too, or it might actually take our conversation in a more powerful direction. Now it's not about me. It's about doing what's right for the moment or what's right for the business. And so I think we have that opportunity all day long to check ourselves and to decide, I'm going to show up with the intention of being of service.
I love that. But I also think there's I don't know what we call it. Maybe there's a step in between there before adding that new mindset of be of service. I really believe there's something we need to let go of. There's something we need to let go of that we are holding on before we add that new mindset or different mindsets. Because no matter how much we add, there's still something that we're holding on to that we're not letting go. And because we still have that, it doesn't matter how much we add.
So what is that thing that we're not letting go of?
I think now this depends on each person. The thing that whatever they have to let go. It's the thing that's holding them back in the first place.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So it could be the narrative around the situation, or maybe a bad experience that has happened to you in the past that keeps you from being willing to take risks in the future, something like that.
Yeah. Well, maybe let's use that example. Someone get asked a question, or maybe they want to share an idea. So if we were saying, how can we be focusing less on ourselves and be more of service, right? If that's the flip side, maybe what they have to let go of is making mistakes are bad. I'm just giving a random example. Making mistakes are bad, and it's going to harm my reputation. So if that is always there, then it doesn't matter how much they can be of service to others. If they still think saying ums or saying the wrong thing, it's still going to harm them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really good point. So does your work focus on helping them get rid of that?
I would say, I would say both. Removing and then adding, because once you clear everything out, well, what do you do next? So I would say a little bit of both.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I often talk about too is to really know who you want to be. So in the moment, if we were to just theoretically imagine a meeting, who do you want to be in that meeting? Do you want to be the person that shares your ideas, that shares your question? Like, what do you value in that moment? What does success look like to you? And then to really try to stay connected to that vision as well, because it's really hard in the moment. Like you said before, you don't prepare for earthquakes in the earthquake itself. If you say, like, I want to be the person who bravely asks the question, or who, addresses risks as they show up, et cetera. I'm making this up, but whatever it is, right? To know that and to really stay connected to that, so that when you find yourself in that situation, it becomes a question of, how do I show up in alignment with my values or not? Right. And it just kind of gives you more of a blueprint for how to move forward in uncertain situations.
Yes. I think it's key that people have that. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. But one thing I don't know why I like to play devil's advocate.
No, I love it.
As an example, procrastination. When people say, I know I need to go to bed at 10. I know my values. I know that if I go to bed earlier, it'll make me more successful tomorrow. But then 10 p.m. comes around, they know who they need to be, but they can't be yet at 10 p.m.
That's right.
That makes sense. They know the action. They know what to do.
Yeah. Well, and I would say that takes us back to where we started too, of what's getting in the way.
Mm.
Right? Why can't you go to bed at 10 p.m.? What's keeping you from doing that? And what's the opportunity there to start chipping away at those things that are keeping you from getting that sleep?
all these problems with us being human.
Exactly. That's the hardest thing. Is there any situation that brings you self-doubt these days? Like, have you experienced imposter syndrome recently?
I would say no, not much. No.
And do you find that that's just part of how you see the world, or do you have to consciously, you mentioned at the beginning, it doesn't bug you. You notice it, but it doesn't bug you. Do you find yourself consciously moving on from things, or it's just that you're not in situations that trigger self-doubt?
I don't think I'm in the situations that would trigger self-doubt.
Is there anything beyond what we've already talked about that you think other people can learn from your experience? That, like, if someone else wanted to experience life the way you do with less self-doubt, what would they need to do differently in order to?
I would say I'll share a few mindset things that I've learned. I don't know where, probably through trainings or Google, wherever. One is, if you're a fifth grader, you'll be an expert to the third grader. Therefore, if you're just a step ahead and if you're able to help others, then that's it. Most people, even if they're a college student, they're too far removed from being a third grader, so they can't even connect anymore. So again, it helps going back to, are you able to just help others get to where they need in the next steps? Another mindset thing, I'm just quickly throwing these out now.
No, this is great.
I would say another quick mindset shift would also be, depending on where you want to go with your career, maybe it's a leader, maybe it's a CEO, or you want to go up there, is, do you want to be the expert, or do you want to be a leader? I believe a leader is knowing how to manage people. So therefore, you can't be an expert at this. Yes, you can be an expert, but at the same time, your job is to communicate with others. When you are the CEO, let's just say, for example, you can't know everything about every little job function. Your job as the leader is to get the best information, or to communicate the information around, so to help the organization grow. So if that means, if you want to become a stronger leader, it's knowing how to be okay not knowing everything, because that's part of the job. You can't know everything later on.
I'm really glad you brought up that point, because that might have been something you and I talked about last time too. And I think that's really helpful for anybody who sees themselves as being on a leadership track, is to recognize that that expertise that you prize today will not serve you as you move on to higher levels of strategic leadership, because, to your point, that's not what that job is about. And so I think that can be helpful in trying to let go a little bit of the expectation of knowing everything and being able to do everything yourself, because it's just not possible.
Yeah. And sometimes, we get stuck on the mindsets that we have, and we just see things one way right now. Another one I want to share actually is, I was thinking about this earlier. You know how they say, if you have more money, maybe you'll be happier, right? But we know, even maybe if you're thinking about it now, when you have more money, maybe you just want more money in a way, and maybe money doesn't buy you happiness, right? At the same time, there's also a saying that goes, money only magnifies who you are more. Okay. Having more money only magnifies the true self. So therefore, if you like to save now, maybe when you have a lot of money, you'll still be saving. Kind of like Warren Buffett. He doesn't drive any flashy cars. He still likes to save. But flipping this back on imposter syndrome, same thing. What do you want more of? I think people say, I need more skill. I need more knowledge. Having more skill, so if we relate it that way, having more skill or more knowledge will only magnify your self-doubts again. So what are you not happy with now as the person that you are?
That's a really good point. I think that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely something for everyone to think about, because we can never know everything, right? And you're right. I see this a lot with people who use higher education as a way to compensate for self-doubt, right? Like, well, I'll just get another degree. You see people with a million letters after their names and they still don't feel confident, right? Yeah. It just makes you so aware of everything else you don't know. And so you really, like you've been saying, you've got to get to the root cause, or else you're just going to be in school forever.
Yeah, not saying it's not bad. It's good to go to school and learn, but
sure, but with a purpose that's beyond just covering for your own insecurities.
Yeah. I think it's just so hard to see it ourselves at time. Mm-hmm. Once we're able to see it, the other day I was talking to a potential client, and he's very young. And some people, when they're young and they're really successful, they have these thoughts of, people are looking at me like I'm too young. Like he's the owner of a company that has like 50 people. He's the big boss, and he still thinks people are looking at him because he's young. But he's the biggest boss out there. It's so
true. I actually had that conversation with someone recently too. There's always something that we see in ourselves that other people don't see that makes us feel insecure. And it's all about what we do with that, right? How we process that and what attention we give to it, because nobody's perfect. And, I think we're all a work in progress.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious where people can find you. What do you want people to do if they want to follow up with you?
I would say you can go to BostonSpeaks.com. Again, my bread and butter, if you are facing speaking anxiety, there is a free webinar you can watch. Go to BostonSpeaks.com or email me at kit@BostonSpeaks.com. That's
great, Kit. Thank you so much. I love the role of devil's advocate that you played. I think this is a really great conversation that I'm sure will be helpful to many. And so thanks for taking the time to have it with me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kim. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you're listening to this, chances are you struggle with imposter syndrome or other confidence issues too. Please know that you are in great company. As an executive coach and former high-tech leader, I spent years battling imposter syndrome. There were times in my corporate life when I was absolutely sure that this was the moment that everyone would figure out that I didn't belong in the room. But it never happened. And through the years, with the help of research, coaching, and other resources, I've learned to help myself and others overcome self-doubt and advance our careers with strength and confidence. If you'd like to continue this conversation, please join my Leading Women Facebook group, where women of diverse roles, levels, and backgrounds come together to ask questions, share challenges, and support one another in a safe, trusted space that's difficult to find in the workplace. Check out the link in the show notes for more information on how to find us. And please join us again next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.